There's this connection between economic status, if you like, and dynamics on the one hand, and the politics of the day. And the politics of the day, as you can see in certainly the western part of the world, has a key influence over economic policy choices that countries are making. So that dynamic, chairpersons, is something that our parliament should also concern itself with, and how it impacts upon our own situation. That then leads to the next point, which is the necessity for transformation, or radical transformation of our own situation. And we should find some basis upon which to agree that this disparity between the 10% and the 90%, the continued reinforcement of inequality, the maldistribution of wealth in South Africa, the fact that we still have a serious problem of intergenerational poverty. In other words, we're not breaking the poverty cycle. The lack of accumulation of assets and wealth and prosperity in the hands of the lower middle class, and that's one of the results from the study as well, that there's the so-called missing middle, 60, 70,000 family income to about 300, 400,000 family income, is completely stuck in terms of prosperity filtering down to them. And that's an issue that across party lines we should be concerned about, and find some consensus on what transformation actually means in the lives of these people. The last point is that there's a connection between growth and transformation. If the growth engine doesn't kick in, transformation becomes a lot more difficult. But the word transformation has a much wider meaning, as we say in the speech. That transformation must mean, in the context of these numbers and the reality in South Africa, that changes to our economy and to both its inner dynamics and ownership patterns must mean a change in the lives of the vast majority of South Africans, the 55 million people, not just an improvement in the lives of a select few. It must mean that we must choose a new, if you like, economic model, which would suggest a different approach to restructuring our economy. Because there are new dynamics at play, new technologies that are coming to the fore, artificial intelligence that is going to impact upon the way jobs are conceived into the future. And it's better for us to start anticipating those, because they'll certainly begin to impact upon our own economy, and some of it is already happening, robots in factories, and more of it is going to come. So what does a job mean 10 years from now? How will people earn an income? Let alone the fact that we have high levels of unemployment in South Africa at the moment. It must also, transformation must also mean and give some guidance on how do we deconcentrate a very concentrated economy, which is part of the legacy that we've inherited from our past. Because concentration means price dominance, concentration means no competition of any significant order. Concentration also means difficulty in terms of breaking barriers to entry in different industries as well. And that means we have a less efficient economy at the end of the day. So what does deconcentration mean? Are competition laws adequate and competition policy adequate for the kind of historical tasks that we face? Or does it actually go beyond that as well? And the bottom line, ultimately, as you'll see in this slide, is that the low growth trap that we're finding ourselves in is not going to be helpful in any of the senses that we require growth to be helpful at this point in time. So we'll take you through the details and then avail ourselves to any questions that you might have. Thank you, chairpersons.
Thanks, Minister. DG can proceed.
Thank you very much, chairpersons, honorable members and minister. The next slide, number 3, will summarize it. It was a key theme in the minister's speech. It runs through the budget, which is that there is no contradiction between transformation and economic growth. In fact, it may well be that if we transform in fundamental ways, as the Minister articulated, that could spur growth. And if, of course, we were to focus on just growing without transforming, that too would not be sustainable. So transformation must be broad-based, and indeed, to achieve that, we must, or it must mobilize investment, create jobs, and empower South Africans or South African citizens to be able to do things for themselves, to participate in the economy in as meaningful a way as possible, and indeed they must be able to accumulate assets, accumulate wealth, and improve their livelihoods, as we had indicated. Now, on the next slide, we we list a number of things that are required to achieve inclusive growth. If you look at the sub-bullets under the third bullet there, we talk to the issues of the transformation of patterns of asset ownership, production, and competition, as the Minister was alluding, but also the complementarities between private sector and public sector, which would synergize and ensure that we achieve much higher rates of growth than we have seen so far. Of course, providing workers and the poor with access to markets and social and economic infrastructure. So all of those things, we believe, would actually set us on the path to achieving higher growth, mass-based participation in the mainstream economy, and of course, make a fundamental change in ownership patterns, in the quality of life of South Africans. And the next slide is a very familiar slide, slide number 5. Just when we think about crafting a fiscal framework, we always have to reflect on what the global economy is likely to look like for the period that we would be crafting the budget for, and assess what that will mean for the South African economy. Of course, as the budget review and the Minister's speech of yesterday indicated, it would seem that the world economy, so to speak, it's on a path of recovering, but there is a lot of uncertainty in the environment, characterized or manifesting itself in sort of inward-looking, you can say, extremely protectionist policies. Some of them we are yet to know how they will impact on the global economy and on South Africa's growth prospects. But we hope that the prospects will still be good enough for us to realize the growth focus that we set out on the next slides. Now, I've touched on the issue of global uncertainty. The next slide, quite briefly, just shows over a period of time an index of commodity export prices. And it just shows, that the peaks and troughs and the fact that we have had in recent times, go back to the 70s, very strong growth in that index, and South Africa benefited quite massively from that. Of course, the index comes down, and then the recent boom that we saw, and followed by some tanking. But of course, the point we make in the budget review and the minister's speech is that the commodity prices do seem to be on some path to recover. That's partly why our focus are what they are. Now, on South Africa's economic focus, on slide 7, we anticipate that growth will improve, albeit moderately so, supported by the real depreciation in the currency, which we expect would support the competitiveness of South African exports. I've touched on the issue of commodity prices already. The drought appears to be behind us. We would hope that the fall armyworms don't replace it in one form or another. The electricity situation has stabilized. Our base forecast assumes that that situation is going to stay the same. And of course, in the budget review, we also show a chart which shows the number of person hours lost, which has fallen considerably in the last 2 years. And we assume that that will continue. Those things put together get us to come to the forecast for growth that you see in the towards the bottom of the table, 1.3 in 2017, rising to about 2.2 by the third year of the forecast period. Of course, we always want to draw the attention of honorable members to the fact that we make this variation of a calendar year when we talk this forecast versus the fiscal year. The difference is quite material because they overlap, I think, only by 2 quarters, because you drop one, you pick another one, and all of a sudden they can produce quite a different thing. Anyway, so on the next slide, perhaps the most important point to make on that slide is just to look at those red bars where real growth in fixed investment contracted. The 2 parts you see, 90s and late 2000s, you will see that each originated from an external, you can call it shock of one sort or another, spilling over into the gross fixed investment trend in South Africa. We don't know of any external, call it factor, shock of consequence like those 2, which explains the dip in 2016, which calls for deep reflection. Sort of necessitates that we should pause and ask ourselves, could it be that this is a manifestation more of domestic factors, conditions, and if so, what are those? And you would see, again, summarized in the budget review, chapter 1, things that we do think that if they were to be, call it resolved, concluded, insofar as their policy developments, we do think that they would unleash the potential of the economy. On slide 9, we show data for the key sectors of the economy and how the sectors have performed over time. You will see that gross value or real value added in agriculture fell over the last 2 years. It's understandable because of the drought, mining, and we sort of connect the mining one to safety stoppages, commodity prices, and rise in costs in that period. And of course, you can see that the services, the real estate, finance, insurance, services sector has remained, you can call it the mainstay of the economy. On the budget proposals, I don't want to bore you too much about them because you heard about them, and I saw many people commenting on them. But the expenditure, on the expenditure side, revised it for 2017-18 down by 10 billion. We had, the government had made the commitment as far back as February last year in relation to this, and indicated that additional taxes would be necessary. Details of those to the extent or to the tune of 28 billion, and details of those are set out in Chapter 4 of the budget review. Gap in revenue and the downward revisions that carried through in future years, government has been able to still stick firmly on the path of fiscal consolidation. Marginal slippage, maximum 0.2% of GDP. We think that that's not something material, consequential enough to write home about it. Of course, where we will end in each one of those future years, as both the budget review and the minister's speech signaled very strongly, is going to depend on what happens to growth and what happens to revenues correspondingly. Net debt will stabilize over this period, and I'll get to a table just now that shows the switch in the primary balance from a deficit to a surplus, which technically just by is it just my ears? Oh, there's
Sorry, DG, I think there's a technician tampering with this sound and vision. They are, oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, let me
We have
continue.
requested them
First,
to-
I heard the sound without
Okay.
seeing what was happening, so I was about to run out. I only come from Kanduli after all. So I'm saying the debt will stabilize. Now, quite often, questions get asked about this. People say you had set a target of 46, 48%. There is never a target of tax to GDP that's set. We just state what the consequential change in this ratio is after a whole lot of things that government can influence or decide on. This turns out to be. Now, this is not meant to suggest that it is not an indicator we don't care about. But it's just to say, sometimes too quickly, if there was a number and we say, now we think that will stabilize at around this, then people say, last time you said, and this time you have missed the target. It's not quite, which is not quite the case. We would have preferred that that ratio shouldn't perhaps touch or exceed 50, but there it is. The most important indicator, in our humble opinion, is the primary balance that I will get to, and whether debt stabilizes. In other words, ceases to be on the rise as a proportion of GDP, because that is the real measure that does the country have a handle, an ability to limit the extent to which debt runs away, and we think we are actually as a country. Wage bill has stabilized. Of course, we've got to bear in mind and be frank with ourselves, we are in the last, or shall I say, next financial year, we will enter the last year of the current wage agreement. So there is only 1 year for which there is a wage agreement applicable for the next 3-year MTF. The 2 outer years are based on assumptions. This normally gets us into trouble. Yesterday, I was somewhere to collect a memorandum, and the people were saying, Treasury fixes this thing. It's not fixed. But we have to have a budget that makes sense, which must make some assumption about what wage bill growth is likely to be, understanding that the outcome will be determined by the wage agreement. So some procurement reforms have been made, and state-owned companies are a risk. The minister spoke to the need to inject some capital in some of them over time. If we've chosen to have them, then they must be going concerns. You can't have them and then leave them teetering on the brink of not being going concerns. The budget, our budget is redistributive. Both, I could even say that it's progressive. I hope I'm not abusing the meaning of the word. If you look at our taxes, those who earn a lot more or earn more pay proportionally more in taxes versus those who earn less or little on the one hand. And in terms of benefits, the benefits of public expenditures tend to accrue largely to the lower income groups. And the chart that's on slide 11 shows just that. If you go, perhaps you read that chart from the right, extreme right, you would see that the top 10% of the households receive, insofar as the social spending, they receive 6%, benefit to the tune of 6%, whereas they contribute 72% in taxes. If you jump to the extreme left, look at the bottom 50%, you get a reversal of that. That makes the budget to be redistributive. We'll show it further when we look at the next slide with the charts at the bottom, which just show the per capita allocations to provinces. You will see that what you would call, broadly speaking, poor provinces tend to get proportionally more, both in the form of the equitable share per capita and in the form of conditional grants. Take Northern Cape, sparsely populated, generally poor. Then you see the bar standing taller than all of them. It's not measuring the land area, which is another advantage they have. Also, then juxtapose that against Gauteng, which accounts for about 35%, I think, of GDP. But in terms of what Gauteng receives, excuse me, in per capita allocations, both equitable share and of course, if you were to look deeper into the stats on the income or economic profiles of households, individuals, you would see that indeed this is redistributive. And again, because ruralness and poverty tend to overlap, if you look on at the graph on the bottom right-hand side, you would see that mostly rural municipalities are the biggest beneficiaries of the redistributive character of our resource allocation processes, whereas the metros where the wealth is generated, the bulk of the economic activity takes place, are on the left-hand side. If we flip to the next slide, a matter that was spoken about at length in the minister's speech, the tax shortfall. Honorable members would recall, it was 23 in October, estimated, We now have revised that estimate upwards to 30.4 billion. Largely, it's PIT, which historically had tended to help support tax collection. It had been more buoyant until now. VAT, largely because of a fall in imports, customs, and you can see, then corporate income tax has offset some of that. So we then get to 14, which is the consolidated fiscal framework. The way to perhaps look at this is first to just look at 2017-18, the column, because that is the year with the aggregates, some of which are in the Division of Revenue Bill, which the committees will be considering, in the Appropriation Bill, again, which is going to be law. So those aggregates are material and important in that respect. Revenue, 1.4 trillion. Expenditure, 1,563.1, pardon me, trillion. And non-interest expenditure, 1.4 trillion. And you can see that debt service cost, it's 169. And perhaps it's more important to call this debt service cost, not interest payments. I mean, just because over that period, there are also redemptions, just to bear in mind. Sorry about that. And of course, the budget balance, 149, translating to 3.1% in percentage terms, and the primary balance, positive 0.4. That's where I was talking about that switch. In fact, it occurs this year, the switch, on a consolidated basis, which then gives you that stabilization I was talking about. Of course, then if you want to see trends, are things improving over time? You can start at the bottom and just see that the primary balance will be decidedly positive at 60 billion or 1.1% of GDP by the last year, and the budget balance minus 2.6. So we are on course. We are on course to achieve our fiscal objectives as we had set them out last year in October. Not that there is any material deviation from that, from what we had said in February, save for what I'm referring to in relation to taxes. 15, slide 15, it's just, I mean, I can really say it's a graphical representation of what I've just talked to, especially the difference between revenue and non-interest expenditure. And again, 16 shows the stabilization of debt, but then we show both take gross, which is where we just look at debt without taking into account the fact that we've got cash balances, but also net, which is saying now, assuming, not assuming, taking into account that we've got cash balances because we know them, they are there in the bank, and those will be your foreign or your sterilization deposits and whatever other cash is in the system. The proposals, I know that honorable members have scrutinized this part. I won't waste your time. I know that people have worked out now how much tax they will pay this time around. So I don't have to bore you with it. But on a very, very serious note, there is very limited adjustment for bracket creep this time around again. Full adjustment would have amounted to, I think, some 14 billion. We have done a partial adjustment, just giving back 2 billion, 2.5, held back 12 billion or thereabout. First adjustment. So somewhere, someone were working last night and you can see the effects of it. Someone said to me, 16 billion from just 100,000 people, because they had missed, because they had the 45% the new bracket. They thought that all of the 16 billion would come from there. I said, look, no chance. The biggest proportion of it still comes from the people where the emphasis has been very little, by the way. Life is very strange in that regard, because 14 billion, 12, am I right? No, yeah, sorry, 12.1. The biggest adjustment is coming from, in terms of the contribution to the PIT take, from the partial adjustment for fiscal drag, whereas the bracket is going to yield 4.4 billion, the new bracket. And then it's the dividend withholding tax, which is introduced just to make sure that we retain the horizontal equity of the tax system. You pay your fair share regardless of how you receive your income. That is it. And of course then bits in the general fuel levy, which we are exceedingly mindful can be viewed as being regressive, and of course then the tax on cigarettes and alcohol, I suspect will be sobering to those who indulge in those two items. We show then a pie chart which people, the House is familiar with, insofar as where the money goes. Education still stands out, basic education, and when you combine it with post-school education, then you realize that indeed the government is putting the money where its priorities are, education, and of course you can see where health is, social protection, economic affairs, which is very important insofar as future growth is concerned. Of course, that black part of the chart, which is debt service costs, appropriately named here, is the area that we want to keep as small as possible. But it's not very easy to control, because once you have taken debt, that part just takes care of itself from a certain point. On the next slide, we show the growth rates, which just says what we all know. I won't waste your time. Debt service costs being the fastest rising, the next one being post-school education and training. That one is good. Of course, we, as the Minister said in his speech and in the interviews we conducted, we need to maintain a reasonable balance in the proportional, if I may call it that, funding levels, rates of growth across the entire system. Putting too much resources, perhaps, in higher education, if it means at the expense of the lower levels, it may just, not be consistent with everything that we want to do. In fact, there is research to show that returns, both private and social, to education are higher at the lower levels than at the higher levels. In fact, at the higher levels, private returns are very high to an individual than society. But I won't bore you with that stuff. Some of the budget allocations, I will not repeat them with your permission. There may be a couple of those, by the way, that we need to correct. We doing things in a big rush towards the end. There were one or two numbers that we got wrong. Some of them are over 3 years, but we said 1 year, and others, but we apologize for that. Then we get to where the public sector infrastructure investment has been going. The slide is 21, and you, honorable members, will see, over the years, there has been firm growth, strong growth in investment. State-owned entities playing a very important part for almost all the time, but of course, there is now sort of leveling off of that. There have been changes in the procurement area to try and achieve the savings that the minister had challenged the Chief Procurement Office to achieve. Those we summarize in slide 22. There is a gazette that the minister signed, which was published on the 20th of January. It will take effect on the 1st of April when the new financial year begins. It does a number of things which give preference to designated groups, preference to locally produced goods with high local content, and makes adjustments to a number of thresholds. The main purpose is to use procurement smartly to achieve other socio-economic and development objectives without compromising the other objectives insofar as the policies in the different sectors are concerned. On slide 23, we talk to the establishment of the NHA fund. The Department of Health is hard at work, very hard at work to set up the administrative mechanisms, protocols that would pertain to this. And as soon as that work is concluded, hopefully before October, if that is the case, then when we get to the adjustment, it will be possible to do something to make sure that the fund is not an empty shell, as the minister's speech indicated yesterday. Yesterday. And of course, over the long term, as there was signaling, there may be different mechanisms to fund that. And of course, this is going to go to prioritizing very valuable programs like giving hearing aids to learners, spectacles, which will go a long way to enhance their ability to learn effectively, get the maximum benefit from the resources that government is channeling towards that area. We are working with the Department of Economic Development and the PICC on a new budgeting facility for infrastructure projects. The idea here is to make sure that large infrastructure projects that normally have cash outlays over longer periods than the ones for which we currently have our rolling budget frameworks, we can have a more transparent, more comprehensive approach to this, where when we, in the first instance, have a strongly rigorous process for evaluating projects technically. For a particular problem, find or identify the best solution out of a continuum of possible solutions to it. If it's a transport problem, do we need to build airports between the 2 points, a speed train, road, multiple carriage road, all of that kind of stuff, down to determining whether it could be best delivered as a public-private partnership or just a project to be funded directly from the fiscus. Once all of those bits are decided, then have a very transparent way where when we approach Parliament, we set out what is the full commitment fiscally that we're getting the system into, so that it's not piecemeal. We show you a little bit. In the education system that I went through, we had the story of a camel which negotiated with its owner. It was personified, and it sort of asked that it just puts its head in and then said, look, it's the neck. And before the owner realized, the camel was inside and the owner was outside. We don't want to apply that to you and South Africans. That is on 14. Now, on the next slide, we just summarize very quickly the range of public sector institutions that have got various mandates, and we talk to the public sector borrowing requirement, which will be now 254 or 5.8% of GDP. We also talk to the state-owned companies' projected borrowing, which is usually very valuable borrowing, not because a lot of it goes towards infrastructure, not all, but a lot of it. And of course, we make reference to the DFIs. The minister spoke about the state-owned companies, and I know that honorable members had all of that, and I referred to the capital injection into SAA, which is under discussion and possibility for the post office. And we had emphasized it would be done in a deficit-neutral way. We would strive to do it in a deficit-neutral way. The last slide, 27, is the conclusion. Pulls together what I've said, but I don't want to start enjoying hearing myself, because it's the conclusion of the details that I've presented. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Minister and DG, for the presentation. And Deputy Minister, you most welcome as well. Members, as I indicated, we welcome the presentation for engagement as Finance and Appropriation Committees. And obviously, you urge members to be much more pointed, brief, so that we spread participation across. I see the first hand here, the second hand, the third, and the fourth. That's the first chunk. I'll come 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. First hand, the second hand, Tamadropa. Yes. Honorable Menir.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'll be brief. Hopefully there'll be a second round to ask some questions.
Yes.
So let me ask three brief questions in the first round. The first question, with respect, Minister, is in relation to the economic growth forecasts. In the next financial year, National Treasury predicts that there will be 1.3% worth of GDP growth. But the World Bank predicts forecasts 1.1%. Our own Reserve Bank forecasts 1.1%, and the IMF forecasts 0.8%. It speaks to the credibility of National Treasury's growth forecast and the credibility of the budget. Now, given those figures, why is the National Treasury right and the World Bank, the South African Reserve Bank, and the IMF wrong? That's the first question. The second question is in respect of economic policy. Now, in Main Budget 2016, government's economic policy was inclusive growth. That's if you listened to your speech in the medium-term budget policy statement in 2016. If you listen to President Jacob Zuma's State of the Nation address, government's economic policy was now radical economic transformation. Again, if one listened carefully to your speech yesterday, government's economic policy is now transformation for growth. At the end of the day, I put it to you that there's now confusion about what exactly government's economic policy is, and ultimately that must lead to further policy uncertainty, which ultimately must erode investment and growth in South Africa. So in short, what exactly is South Africa's economic policy? Is it inclusive growth? Is it radical economic transformation? Or is it the new blend, transformation for growth? That's the second question. The third question is in relation to tax and spend. I mean, given your tax proposals, I mean, we will raise approximately 4.4 billion rand from the new super tax bracket which you announced yesterday. Fair enough. But equally, if we reduced the size of the executive, from 74 ministers down to about 15 or 16 departments, we could probably save, on our calculation, about 4.7 billion rand. Which raises the whole point about the composition and efficiency of spending. And so I ask you whether you think it's not time to consider implementing a full root and branch, comprehensive spending review so that we can review the composition, efficiency of expending and future spending priorities across all three spheres of government in the medium term between 17-18 and 19-20. Is it not time to actually consider a new approach, a comprehensive spending review, as opposed to the more fragmented fiscal arsenal at your disposal? Thank you.
The second, and Honorable Matlock.
Thanks, Honorable Chair. I want to check here. What sort of leadership is National Treasury providing in the financial sector to prevent the unfortunate financial crimes and collusions by banks? For instance, those 17 banks that have been said that they have been manipulating the South African currency for their own benefit. Secondly, Chair, is around the issue of the deficit and the servicing of deficit. I want to check here, in 2016 budget, there was a promise that there was going to be stabilization around the issue of the debt at 46.2% of the GDP in 2017-18. However, the national debt is currently standing at 50.7%. What is the cause for that? Or also, can I check whether is there a debt limit or the ceiling that has been set by Treasury around the issue of the debt? Or we have a break approach, because we're told that it is going to be stabilized to 46.2%, but now it's sitting at 50.7%. So I want to check whether is there any. The last one, Chair, is around the issue of the contingency reserves. I want to know, how are contingency reserves planned and allocated? Is there a policy guiding it? Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much. The third speaker. Yes, Honorable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both ministers. And
just the name so that it's easier for reference.
in Kamalam,
Yes, Bob.
Batu Mazamba. Off please, Mr. Chairman.
Gubani.
Umazamba.
Mazamba. Okay, thanks, Honorable Mazamba.
Mr. Chairman, let me just say thank you to the finance team for the presentation and for all the effort they put in year after year. My first comment come question would be this, DG, you've quite rightly pointed out that the 12 billion is going to come out of personal income tax, and it's across the board. It's not necessarily the just from the higher brackets. So that was going to be a point I was going to make, but you've made it for me. But the question of the additional tax bracket bringing in 4.4 million, how much have you factored into that 4.4 billion the possibility of people restructuring in order to avoid it, not evade it, to avoid it? In other words, if nothing changed, would it be 10 billion? And then you've said, okay, people will try and manipulate things, and therefore we can rely on 4.4 billion. Then the question of, you made a reference to VAT on fuel. I wonder if you could elaborate on that and whether that is a possibility or not. The SVDP, it's been running now, I think, since October. You say it's brought in, well, there have been declarations of 3.8 billion, and you're now estimating income at 600 million. to me, that sounds quite low, given what we were hearing. I mean, it was just through the airwaves. There was nothing to base it on. It was just when people were giving submissions, how many billions and billions of rands there were secreted abroad. Are we hopeful that there's going to be more significant income rather than the 600 million? Now, I'm pleased that the Deputy Minister has arrived, because my annual is now coming up. Minister, in your speech, you talked about putting the additional capital into SOEs, and the SG, I think, SGDG, has mentioned that, I can't remember which of you said that it was a budget deficit, and you said so in your speech as well. So are we looking then at what we were thinking about, and we mentioned earlier this week, a possible sale, for instance, of Telkom shares to achieve that, as we did with Eskom and the Vodacom shares? Because our estimate is there's 14 billion sitting there available. And if so, how could we realize that kind of revenue without flooding the market with shares? My last one, again with SAA, you say that 3.5 billion of the 4.7 billion has now been used up, the additional 4.7. So that leaves 1.2 billion, as you say in your speech. But that's got to now carry them in terms of a going concern certification that they got until September, because your going concern lasts 12 months. 1.2 billion, going to keep them going now until the end of September, or are we looking at this recapitalization program having to be fairly swift? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. The fourth speaker, yes. Honorable.
Much. Thank you, Minister. Just to commend you and the team for your budget under very difficult economic and political conditions. And we see the rand is below the dollar today, so that says something. Would you say, as other economists have said, that you've done enough to satisfy the sovereign agencies that will be relooking at our credit rating later in the year? And in the light of that, one of the main issues which they highlighted was the SOEs that have been referred to by previous speakers, and in which you on page 91 indicate that guarantees to some state-owned companies remain a major risk to the fiscus. Now, in the light of that, would you comment on some of the findings in the Public Protector's report, which have some severe indictments, and as we know, they are binding, subject to review, as well as some of the aspects raised in the Denton's report relating to Eskom, which to me are a great concern, bearing in mind that National Treasury did look into some of the coal contracts, and we see now that some of the transport costs were way in excess of the cost of the coal. That's the one issue relating to that. And we do appreciate that Parliament has a very significant role of oversight in that regard, but the whole issue of state capture is a massive concern to us. Then the SAA, there was allusion last year to the SAA Express merger in your speech. Would you give us details about that? And I didn't quite understand the capital injection proposed being deficit neutral. If you could unpack that, DG, because so then one presumes it's not a guarantee, but where will those funds come from? And would it then be the consideration of the sale of some non-strategic assets as was done previously? Then thirdly, just briefly, the revenue projection we know came in a lot lower than was projected last year, the 30-odd billion. And we know that your economic growth rate is projected at 1.3%, which is slightly higher than other projections. And we also know that on page 8 of your document, where you indicate there's heightened uncertainty regarding the path of revenue collection. To what degree, and clearly it's half glass half full, glass half empty, and one is dealing with variables. Is there not the possibility that one could sit again with the situation at the end of the year with revenue projections coming in a lot lower than you forecast? And lastly, Minister, you may not wish to answer this, but your relationship with the SARS Commissioner and the relationship between National Treasury and SARS, to what degree is that impacting on the efficiency of revenue collection, given that there are a number of senior staff in revenue that have left for various reasons? Thank you for that, Chairperson.
Thanks, Honorable Swart. The hands now is Honorable Floyd, and then Sheikh Sengwa, and then honorable member will be the fourth. Okay, let's agree that this constitutes first round. You comfortable? You can start responding to. Yes. Okay, that will be the first, just to allow Minister if there are other issues. Can we proceed then?
Thank you.
Honorable Floyd.
Thank you, Chairperson. No, our concern is the decreasing rate of corporate income tax as a proportion of the revenue that you collect. Well, as National Treasurer, of course, with SARS, that it's now at 17%. I think it has been declining over the last 5 years, that as a proportion of the entire revenue collected, corporate income tax is drastically declining, meaning that the main two pillars of South Africa's revenue is personal income tax and the value-added tax, which means that it's ordinary people who are financing South Africa's state, and the companies that make huge profits are not contributing as much as they could in terms of what is required. And that is our concern. And we think that part of that decline, Minister, could be what we've always raised, that the issue of aggressive tax planning by most of these corporations. Isn't it the time that instead of the piecemeal introduction of mechanisms to deal with aggressive tax planning, we should then introduce a comprehensive legislation that will combat and criminalize aggressive tax planning, which will clarify what is avoidance, what is evasion as well in terms of tax practices. Because a substantial component of what is avoidance in South Africa borders on evasion. And that might need a legislative clarification, which I think should be one of the priority focus areas in terms of what should happen. 2 days ago, we together with the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance, attended a seminar which was looking into the role of legislators on combating illicit financial flows. And lots of issues come out there that many countries that have even just implemented some of the few components begin to make progress in practical, tangible terms of collecting additional revenue better from all of those things. We welcome the commitment on that multinational companies are going to be now forced to country by country reporting. It's but one of the mechanisms to deal with tax avoidance. But I think that we must look into a comprehensive legislation that deals with this entirely, so that there is adequate revenue collected to deal with all the issues that are required to be dealt with. And on transformation, I don't hear what National Treasury is saying in terms of transformation. It's like what was apparently said when we left the State of Nation address. I don't know what was said in the State of Nation address. Apparently there was lots of talk and rhetoric around radical economic transformation. But nothing concrete is being said of what exactly should happen with regards to the transformation agenda, because perhaps we must look back in terms of what were attempts in the economic transformation agenda in South Africa. It was an introduction of some charters which were agreed between business, labor, and government, that let's agree on these charters, and all of them have dismally failed. Isn't it time now to legislate some of the transformation commitments with consequences for those that do not comply? I mean, the 30% that you're talking about, for instance, in terms of 30% black ownership, I thought that is what you meant. 30% black ownership on huge corporations that are going to supply the state and engage in tenders must be black representative. That must be legislated if that is your commitment. Who would put a far much higher figure? As the EFF would possibly propose that at least a minimum of 50% of all companies that supply the state at all levels and state-owned companies must be owned and controlled by historically disadvantaged individuals. But that must be legislated. It must not just be a policy articulation that does not have any legal meaning, any legislative meaning. There are so many other sectors that they must look into: the banking sector in terms of ownership, the insurance sector, the audit firms, a variety of sectors. We should legislate transformation commitments. Because if apartheid and colonialism were legislated to segregate our people, to exclude our people economically, the only other way to include them economically is to legislate them into economic participation. There is no willful participation that is going to happen, by the way. There's not going to be willful adherence to transformation charters, and the past 22 years have illustrated vividly that with the transformation charters that have existed, virtually all industries have not included meaningful black participation. They just change faces and put this one there, so we're B compliant, and then after a term, they change to another B group without meaningful participation. I think that is one of the trajectories that you must look into in terms of how you deal with these issues. Lastly is that you said in 2016 that you're going to introduce a tire levy to finance recycling. And you're going to increase the incandescent lube tax, the plastic levy, and the motor vehicle emissions tax and everything else there. And I've not seen the update of how much money did you raise with regards to all of those aspects that you made commitment on in the 2016 budget, so that we're able to keep track of all the issues that we make commitments on. Thanks.
Thank you. Honorable Member, you missed really the opportunity to debate some of the issues in the state of the nation. Your views would have been engaged there quite rigorously. Thanks.
We don't participate in illegal gatherings.
So let's.
We don't participate in illegal gatherings.
Comrade, Honorable, Honorable Sheikh.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, Deputy Minister, let me welcome your pro-poor budget. However, I have some concerns. One of which is, I know a lot of resources are now being put into infrastructure programs. But I think we're all aware that in the Eastern Cape specifically, there has been underspending repeatedly in terms of the mud schools, sanitation, water, electricity. Could you perhaps tell us how are we going to correct this and ensure that the allocations are used correctly and timeously to benefit the poorest of the poor? Minister, the other concern I have is we talk about over 80,000 jobs being lost in the manufacturing and mining industry. And I think this matter was addressed before in terms of the industries that are closing, like in the manufacturing, the leather, the textile, the plastic industry, now the poultry industry is being affected. And I know the President has alluded to increasing import duty on some of this to try and restrict imports. But the question is that enough, or do you believe, Minister, that more drastic steps need to be taken in order to create more jobs? For instance, should we not restrict the import in mass of certain products that is affecting job creation in South Africa, or actually resulting in industries closing down? The other one is the issue, I think we have now picked up on the issue of the banks colluding. But Minister, there's a bigger picture out there. There's a greater problem out there, whether it's in the motor vehicle industry, whether it is in the retail supermarket industry. There's a lot of collusion that is going on, which is affecting the poorest of the poor and how they control prices and things. So I don't know if there is a plan to actually look at that at some stage. The issue of the, must be welcomed, of the 30% to subcontractors on contracts of 30 million or more. However, Minister, my concern is, it is common knowledge a lot of these big businesses are using small businesses as just fronts and enjoying the real benefits of this. What measures are we going to put in place to try and actually stop that? And finally, we've said in the last budget as well, the issue was cost containment was a problem, irregular expenditure was a problem, but we find that it has increased. So obviously, I think the mechanisms we are putting in place are not sufficient. Could you please tell us what could we do next to try and cut down on this, especially fraud, corruption, maladministration, and not getting value for money, which seems to be a problem, starting right from the lower level of municipalities right to top. Thank you. I'll stop.
Thanks, Honorable Hlengwa.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair and Co-Chairs, Minister, and the Finance Delegation. Chair, I'll try to be very, very brief. Honorable Minister, you spoke about the additional 5 billion rands into higher education. And of course, that would be a welcome move in light of the ongoing fees must fall challenges. But Minister, one of the things is that we may end up finding ourselves throwing financial solutions to non-financial problems. And the education is combined receiving about 21% of the allocations, this budget. Now, and the issue is it money that's needed or the capacity that is needed in school so that, you know, because you are now losing in a 12-year cycle of education about 800,000 learners to the system and only about 200,000 in the main actually make it. And a lot of emphasis is being, you know, placed on on infrastructure, which is good. But are we actually producing? You know, can we, the money we're pumping in, is it producing the type of learner who's ready for university or higher education training? Because there does seem to be a gap between the two. So we keep pumping money into education, but the impact is not felt. And I think that is something that needs to be looked at because in the final analysis is if a student receives NSFAS funding and fails, that becomes wasteful expenditure and will probably apply again. And so I just feel that, you know, that is something which must be looked at. Secondly, Minister, you have increased the social grants. What is the take of Treasury on this CPS SASSA problem, which on the 1st of April is obviously we know that the whole deal was unconstitutional and so on. You've made proposals about the Post Bank being one of the, you know, the dispensers of these funds, but I feel that you can't be allocating resources in the manner that you are to an illegal system. It's just a matter of principle, and I feel that Treasury must make, you know, a more forceful attempt at rescuing the situation as things stand. Finally, Chair, municipalities will receive an allocation of about 9.1 of the. Now, there's always the argument that municipalities are closest to the people, all development is local. And I know, Minister, in your previous life at COGTA, you had instituted back to basics to ensure the viability and functionality of municipalities. But what else needs to be done to ensure that municipalities are able to generate the necessary income that they need in identifying economic niche opportunities in order for them to be sustainable? Because the allocation that they are receiving for all intents and purposes is quite small, to say the least. Now, we have to then find ways and means at topping that up. And if things continue this way, we'll end up rendering municipalities, particularly those who are in rural communities or semi-urban and so on, fundamentally useless. So we do need a financial intervention at ensuring that those municipalities are actually sustainable. I say this, of course, noting what you have said, that, you know, the 4-point plan, or which you highlighted yesterday with regards to municipalities, but the financial health remains one of the key critical areas if we want to see viable municipalities. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Member. Yes, Honorable Member, can you proceed?
Thank you. Honourable Minister. Yes.
owing to the resignation of Mr. A.M. Mudau, has been filled with effect from the 14th February by the nomination of Mr. B. Mulife.
Honourable Speaker.
The honourable member was sworn in the Speaker's office earlier today.
Point of order, Speaker. Where is that corrupt bastard?
Honourable Speaker.